My name is Reagan Voss, and I'm 32. 11 days after my son was born, I drove out to Hollow Creek Barn with a folder of vendor contracts under one arm and a car seat under the other. And I found a bank loan officer standing in the reception hall with a laser level, measuring the wall above the doorway for a sign. The sign, still wrapped in plastic against the reception desk, said, "Under new management," in letters big enough to read from the parking lot. My mother-in-law, Denise, stood beside him in her barn coat with a clipboard, directing him 2 inches to the left. She saw me before I'd even set the car seat down. "You're on leave, sweetheart," she said, like she was doing me a kindness. "Someone responsible needs to be here running things." I didn't set the folder down. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Whose management?" And Denise smiled the smile she used on vendors who were about to be told no. "Ours," she said. "It's a family business, Reagan. You'll thank us." But 6 weeks later, when Denise sat across from a state fraud investigator and couldn't explain a signature that was supposed to be mine, it was a folder of my own that answered every question she'd spent 6 weeks refusing to. Before I tell you what was in it and what my father-in-law had been keeping in a tackle box in his garage for the better part of a decade, tell me, what time is it where you're watching this from tonight, and where are you? I always wonder how far a story like this actually travels. The people in it, my mother-in-law Denise, who ran Hollow Creek Barn like a queen runs a court. My sister-in-law Priya, married to Callum's brother Grant, who agreed with whoever had spoken last. My father-in-law Walt, who everyone in the family had quietly stopped counting. And my husband Callum, who'd built half that barn with his own hands and still couldn't bring himself to stand up to his mother, not yet. 4 years ago, when Callum and I married, his family did the thing families do when they want you to feel included without actually including you. They folded me into Hollow Creek Barn as a co-managing member, right alongside Callum, who'd built half of the reception hall's timber frame with his own hands the summer after college. I came in as the 4th generation's outsider with a strange, useful skill. I examined titles and deeds for the county for a living, and I'd spent 9 years learning exactly how families quietly lose things on paper without ever meaning to sign them away. So when we formalized the LLC, I asked for something ordinary in my world and apparently hilarious in theirs. A clause requiring both managing members' signatures for any transfer of operating control. Denise laughed about it at the lunch table when the attorney read it aloud. "We're not going to swindle each other, Reagan," she said. "This is a family business." I signed it anyway. Being the paperwork person meant I handled the vendor contracts, the insurance renewals, the tax filings nobody else wanted to touch, while Denise ran the calendar, the bookings, the face of the place. It also meant that when Walt, my father-in-law, started going quiet at family dinners, really quiet, the kind where he'd nod along and let Denise finish his sentences, nobody thought to ask him what he thought anymore, including me. "Walt doesn't need to worry about the details," Denise would say, patting his hand the way you'd settle a guest who'd wandered into the wrong room. Somewhere in those 4 years, my father-in-law went from running the place his own father built to being someone people talked past at his own table. I noticed it. I filed it away the way I filed everything else. I didn't yet understand that Walt had been doing the exact same thing, quietly, in a tackle box in the garage, for a great deal longer than I had. The morning after I found the loan officer with his laser level, I called my sister Mara before I'd even gotten the car seat's buckle undone. Mara teaches 10th grade history 40 minutes away and has never once needed me to explain a family dynamic to her twice. "They put a sign order in before you were 2 weeks postpartum," she said, not as a question. I told her everything. The barn coat, the clipboard, someone responsible needs to be here. Mara was quiet for a second. Then, "Reagan, this isn't your mother-in-law helping while you recover. This is a company deciding it doesn't need your signature anymore, and picking the 1 month you're the least able to fight it." I wanted to argue with her, the way you want to argue with anyone who says the true thing out loud before you're ready to hold it. I couldn't. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Denise, don't make this bigger than it is." Priya agrees it's temporary, just until you're back on your feet. I went back 3 days later because some part of me still believed that if I showed up composed enough, competent enough, holding my son quietly against one shoulder instead of leaving him with Callum, they would remember I wasn't a guest either. Denise had coffee going and a folder of her own on the reception desk, the kind of folder that means someone has already decided how a conversation will end before it starts. Priya was there, arranging a plate of vendor samples, like we were hosting a tasting instead of a hostile handover. Callum stood near the window with his arms crossed, looking at the floor. "We amended the operating structure," Denise said, sliding the folder toward me without opening it herself. "Simplifies things while you're focused on the baby. You'll still draw your share." "Show me the amendment," I said. She didn't. "It's filed, Reagan. It's done. Grant's going to help with day-to-day, Priya's handling bookings, and I'll oversee vendors until you're back to full speed." Priya didn't look up from the pastries. Callum still hadn't said a word. I asked the only question that mattered. "Whose signature is on the amendment authorizing my removal as a managing member?" Denise's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. The flicker of a woman realizing the person across the table might actually read a document before agreeing to be angry about it. "Yours, of course," she said. "We had it notarized the week before the baby came. You were exhausted. You probably don't even remember signing it." I remembered every document I had signed that month, the way I remember every document I've ever signed, because reading things carefully before I sign them is not a hobby. It's 9 years of professional training. I hadn't signed anything the week before Asher was born, except a hospital consent form and a card for Callum's coworker's retirement party. She wanted me rattled. She got a woman who reads deeds for a living. "I didn't sign that," I said, quietly, and for the first time since I'd walked in, nobody in that room had a script ready. "The Secretary of State's Business Division will mail anyone a certified copy of a filed document for $12, which is either the cheapest insurance policy in America or the most expensive thing Denise ever assumed I wouldn't bother buying." I ordered it that same afternoon, and while I waited for the envelope, I pulled the specimen signature card from our original LLC formation packet, the one every managing member signs once, at the start, so a bank or a court can compare it later if anyone's signature is ever in question. It had sat in a fireproof box in our hall closet for 4 years, useful the way a fire extinguisher is useful, which is to say never, until exactly one afternoon. When the certified copy came, I laid both signatures side by side on our kitchen table, the way I'd laid out title documents for 9 years, looking for the things an amateur never checks and a professional never stops checking. My real signature has a particular hitch in the capital R, a hesitation my hand has made since I was 12, and my father taught me cursive off a placemat. The amendment signature had the hitch too. Almost. It landed a half beat too even, too practiced. The kind of R you get when someone traces a real signature slowly instead of writing their own quickly. I have flagged exactly this kind of forgery 11 times in 9 years of examining titles, always on someone else's deed, never once imagining I'd be laying my own name out to check it for a lie. I didn't confront anyone yet. I called a business fraud attorney a friend from the title office had used once, a sharp, unhurried woman named Naomi Reyes, and I brought her the specimen card, the certified amendment, and copies of the loan paperwork the officer had been carrying the day I found him with his laser level. Naomi looked at the 2 signatures for a long time under a small lamp on her desk. "This is either a very good forgery or a very confident one," she said, "possibly both. Don't tell your mother-in-law what you've found. Not yet." People who think they've gotten away with something are far easier to catch mid-sentence than after they've had time to prepare an explanation. The second piece I wasn't looking for at all. It came from Callum, 3 nights later, after Asher had finally gone down and the house had gone quiet in the particular way new parent houses go quiet, equal parts relief and dread. "My dad's been weird," he said, not looking up from the dishes. "He's been spending hours in the garage, won't let anyone near his old tackle box, told Grant to knock before he came in there, like it's a teenager's bedroom." I asked Callum how long that had been going on. "A while," he admitted. Longer than I want to think about, honestly. Mom says he's just puttering. Grant thinks it's early dementia. I don't know what to think. I thought about a man who had gone from running Hollow Creek Barn to being patted on the hand at his own table, and I thought about how convenient it would be, for certain people, if the story everyone told about Walt was puttering, or early dementia, or a man who didn't need to worry about the details anymore. I went out to the garage myself 2 days later, on the pretense of borrowing a ladder, and found Walt sitting on an overturned bucket next to a green metal tackle box with a bent latch, a legal pad open on his knee, doing math in handwriting so careful it looked engraved. He didn't hide it from me. He looked up, considered me for a second, the way you consider whether a person is finally worth the risk, and then he turned the tackle box around so I could see inside. It wasn't lures. It was 6 years of vendor invoices, folded and dated, next to a single column of numbers in his own hand, and beside that, a second column, what each vendor's contract said they should have been charged, and hadn't been. Denise has been taking a cut from every florist and caterer who wants the exclusive referral slot for 11 years, Walt said, in a voice steadier than I'd heard from him in longer than I could remember. I found the first discrepancy in a florist's invoice back when your husband was still in college. I told her I'd noticed. She told me I was confused. So I stopped telling her what I noticed. I just kept writing it down. I asked him why he'd never told anyone. Not Callum, not an attorney, not the bank. Walt closed the tackle box gently, the way you close something you've protected for a long time. Because the day I tell someone, he said, I have to be right, in front of everyone, forever. I wanted to be sure first. $96,000 sure. Hollow Creek Barn holds a vendor open house every spring, a walkthrough for the caterers and florists and photographers who work the property, part networking event and part audition for next season's referrals, and Denise had scheduled this year's for the second week of Asher's life, which I now understood was not a coincidence but a deadline. I came anyway, in a blazer that didn't quite close over the last of the baby weight, with Naomi's card in one pocket and the specimen signature comparison in a manila folder in the other, because if Denise intended to announce a new Hollow Creek Barn to 40 vendors before I'd even had 6 weeks to recover, I intended to be standing in the room when she did it. She did it in the reception hall, under the beam Callum had cut himself, in front of a florist named Odette who'd worked every wedding at Hollow Creek Barn for a decade, a caterer named Reuben who'd brought his own son along to learn the referral business, and 24 others holding coffee and name tags. As some of you may have heard, Denise said, in the voice she used for toasts, Hollow Creek is entering an exciting new chapter. Grant and Priya will be handling day-to-day operations going forward, with my oversight. Reagan will remain involved, of course, in a reduced capacity, while she focuses on her family. A small ripple of applause, the kind people give because they're not sure yet what they're clapping for. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't wait to be recognized. I said, clearly, into the same room, I'd like to correct something, since it involves a legal document with my name forged on it. The applause didn't finish. Odette lowered her coffee cup. Denise's smile locked in place the way a door locks when the latch catches wrong. Reagan, this isn't the venue for. It's exactly the venue, I said. You just held it in front of 40 people. I opened the folder. I didn't shout. I have spent 9 years learning that the loudest person in a room about a document is almost always the person with the weakest claim to it, and I had no intention of losing that advantage. I read the operating agreement's actual clause aloud, the one requiring both managing members' signatures for any transfer of operating control, the one Denise had laughed at over lunch 4 years ago. Then I held up 2 signature cards, side by side, my real one from the original filing, and the one on the amendment Denise had used to secure $185,000 in business credit 6 weeks earlier. A forensic document examiner will tell you in about 4 minutes what most of you can already see from here, I said. That R doesn't hesitate the way mine does. Someone traced it. Grant tried first, the way the least implicated person in a room always tries first, talking fast about misunderstandings and family stress and how none of this needed to happen in front of vendors. Priya said nothing at all, which told me more than anything she could have said. Denise recovered the way she always recovered, reaching for warmth like a coat. Reagan is exhausted, she told the room, touching her own chest the way you'd touch it to show how deeply something wounded you. New mothers say things. We all love her. Let's not make this about paperwork. It is about paperwork, I said. That's the whole point of paperwork. It doesn't care how exhausted anyone is. It just sits there being true. Reuben, the caterer, was the one who finally asked the question that mattered, quietly, to no one in particular, the way people ask something they already suspect the answer to. Is that why the referral terms changed last spring? He said. Why some of us started paying a different placement fee than we used to? Odette set her coffee down entirely. Denise's face did the thing I would only fully understand 3 weeks later, when Walt's tackle box finished telling its own story to an investigator. A flicker of someone doing fast math on how many people in the room already knew a piece of something she'd assumed was hers alone to know. Callum, for the first time since I'd walked into that reception hall carrying a car seat and a folder, stepped forward and stood next to me instead of near the window. He didn't say much. He said, "Show them the rest, Reagan." And that sentence, more than any single document, told me which version of this family I still had left. I didn't show them the rest. Not there. Naomi had been very clear about that, and for once in my life the calm version of me and the furious version of me wanted exactly the same thing, to let the next part happen somewhere with subpoena power instead of catering trays. By the time I got home from the open house, there were 14 messages waiting, none of which I answered that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, with Asher asleep against my chest in the carrier, because some things get done one-handed, or they don't get done at all, and I wrote the only kind of letter I trust, one with no feelings in it whatsoever. To the Secretary of State's Business Filings Division, I submitted a formal dispute of the amendment, attaching the specimen signature card, the certified copy of the filing, and a brief signed statement from a forensic document examiner Naomi had retained, who confirmed in 4 sentences what I'd seen in 4 minutes at the open house. To Cedar Trust Bank's fraud department, I submitted a parallel notice. The $185,000 business line of credit had been secured using a filing now formally disputed as fraudulent, and I requested the loan be frozen pending review. I sent both notices certified, blind copied Naomi on everything, and saved every page in a folder on my laptop labeled, with the least creativity I have ever shown in my life, Hollow Creek, documentation. Walt came to the house himself 2 days later, without calling first, which was its own kind of statement from a man who'd spent 6 years being managed around. He set the tackle box on my kitchen table, the same table where I'd laid out the 2 signatures, and asked me, plainly, whether Naomi could use what was inside it. "I don't want this to just be about your signature," he said. "A forged signature is one bad afternoon. What's in that box is 11 years. I called Naomi while he sat there, and she was quiet for a moment after I described it, the way people go quiet when a case gets easier and heavier at exactly the same time. That changes this from a forgery dispute into a pattern of financial exploitation," she said. "One is a mistake, someone panics and explains away. The other is something a family finds very hard to call a misunderstanding." The group chat Denise had built years ago to coordinate holiday schedules and had slowly turned into her own private broadcast channel, lit up that same week. Priya posted first, a single line, "Some people can't be happy running a business without needing to control everything, even after having a baby." Family friends I hadn't spoken to in years piled on underneath it, the way people do when they've been handed a story and no reason yet to doubt it. Reagan's always been the difficult one. This is what happens when you let outsiders into a family business. I read every message. I answered exactly once. For clarity, I wrote, "I hold a formal specimen signature comparison showing the amendment authorizing my removal was forged, a certified filing dispute with the Secretary of State, and a fraud notice with Cedar Trust regarding a $185,000 loan secured using that forged document." I'm not controlling anything. I'm correcting a false filing. Attached. One photograph. The two signatures, side by side. The hesitation in the real R, impossible to miss once you knew to look for it. Nobody typed for 11 minutes. Then Odette, the florist, who had somehow ended up added to a family group chat years ago and never removed, quietly left it. Then a cousin I'd met twice. Then Priya's own sister. Denise called more than a dozen times over the following week, and I let everyone go to voicemail because I had learned, the hard way, exactly what my family did with my voice when I offered it to them in the middle of an argument. They edited it. They did not get to edit a certified filing. On the 5th day, she stopped calling and sent a single text instead. We need to talk about this like adults, before it becomes something neither of us can undo. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Naomi without comment, because I had already learned, watching Walt close that tackle box gently in his garage, that the undoing Denise was worried about had started a long time before I ever picked up a folder. The formal interview happened 3 weeks later, in a beige conference room at the County Business Fraud Unit, instead of a reception hall with a beam Callum had cut himself, and I want to tell you that felt like a demotion for Denise. And it did, though not for the reason I expected. Investigator Renata Boyd had a voice built for exactly this kind of room, unhurried, unimpressed by anyone's tone, and she had, by the time we sat down, already pulled the specimen card, the certified amendment, the forensic examiner's statement, and, because Naomi had submitted it 11 days earlier, 6 years of Walt's tackle box ledger, cross-referenced against the barn's actual vendor contracts. Denise tried the version she'd used at the open house first, softer now, aimed at an audience that couldn't be charmed. "This is a family disagreement that got out of hand," she said. "Reagan was overwhelmed after the baby. I was trying to help." Investigator Boyd didn't look up from the file. "The forensic examiner's report says this signature was traced, not written," she said. "Whose idea was the amendment, Mrs. Voss?" Denise said it had been a joint decision, informal, everyone on the same page. Grant, sitting 2 chairs down, said quietly that he'd only signed off on being told day-to-day operations, nothing about removing Reagan, and he hadn't seen the amendment itself until the open house. Priya said she'd assumed Denise had cleared it with Reagan directly. Neither of them could say who had actually produced the traced signature, and in a room built for exactly this question, that gap started doing the work no one in the family had wanted to do out loud. Then, Investigator Boyd turned to the second folder, the one with 11 years of dates in Walt's careful handwriting, and asked him directly whether he could explain the discrepancy between the invoiced vendor rates and the contracted ones. Walt had not said a word since we'd sat down. He opened the ledger to a page marked with a strip of masking tape and read 4 lines aloud in a voice that didn't shake once. "Every florist and caterer who wanted the exclusive referral slot at Hollow Creek paid a placement fee that never appeared on the business's books," he said. "I know, because I do the walkthrough with every new vendor personally, and I ask what they were quoted. I've been asking for 11 years. I wrote every answer down because I wasn't sure yet what to do with it, and because a man who raises a concern without proof in this family gets told he's confused." He looked at Denise for the first time since we'd walked in. "I'm not confused, Denise. I've never been confused. I was just waiting to be sure." The room went the particular kind of quiet that has a floor under it. Denise's hand came up to her collar, the gesture I now recognized from every crisis she'd ever managed from the front of a room, except there was no room to manage here, only an investigator writing something down without looking up, and a husband of 40 years who had just told her, in 6 sentences, that he had seen everything and said nothing on purpose, which is its own kind of reckoning that has nothing to do with courts at all. "You knew," Denise said to him, and it wasn't a question, and it landed like one anyway. "I knew," Walt said. "I wanted to be right in front of everyone, not just angry at home. Now I'm both." Investigator Boyd closed the folder at an even pace, the way you close something once it's finished doing its job. "The filed amendment is void," she said. "A signature obtained through forgery has no legal effect, regardless of intent. That reopens Mrs. Voss's operating authority as it stood before the amendment. The loan matter goes to Cedar Trust's fraud unit for restitution. The vendor pattern goes to the county for review of possible theft and fraud charges, given the amount and the duration. She looked at Denise directly for the first time. $96,000 over 11 years isn't a misunderstanding, Mrs. Voss. It's a business model. I didn't say anything else in that room. I'd said everything I needed to say weeks earlier, in a certified letter that didn't care how anyone felt about it. Paper doesn't get flustered. It doesn't need to be believed. It just sits there being true until the right person finally reads it out loud in the right room, and that afternoon, the right person turned out to be a quiet man with a tackle box who everyone in his own family had stopped listening to a long time before I ever showed up. The consequences didn't arrive all at once, and I want to be honest about that, because if you're expecting a single dramatic moment where everything gets undone in an afternoon, that isn't how paper actually works. It works in waves, each one a little quieter than the last, and somehow heavier for it. The first wave was structural. Cedar Trust's fraud unit reversed the $185,000 line of credit within 2 weeks, once the underlying filing was formally voided, and informed Denise in writing that she was personally liable for the outstanding balance, since the loan had been secured under her signature using a document a state investigator had already called fraudulent. The operating agreement reverted to its original terms, which meant, functionally, that Grant and Priya's new titles evaporated the same week they'd been announced to 40 vendors, and Callum and I resumed the roles we'd actually been elected to 4 years earlier by people who'd laughed at the clause that just saved us. The second wave moved through the vendor community, which I hadn't expected to move at all, since I'd assumed loyalty in that world ran to whoever signed the checks. I was wrong. Odette called me herself, not to gossip, just to ask, plainly, whether the placement fee structure was actually changing going forward, because she'd been quietly telling other florists for 2 years that Hollow Creek's referral terms didn't feel right, and she'd started to wonder if she was the problem. She wasn't. Reuben stopped bringing his son to Denise's part of the walkthrough entirely and asked, pointedly, to deal with Callum's schedule instead. Nothing was announced. Nobody organized a boycott. The county's Wedding Vendor Association simply became a place where Denise's name came up a little less, and mine came up in a different tone than it used to. The third wave was Priya's, and it surprised me more than the others. She showed up at my door alone, 3 weeks after the interview, without Grant, without a folder, without anything prepared. I told myself I was staying neutral, she said, standing on my porch the way you stand somewhere you're not sure you're still welcome. I wasn't neutral. I just didn't want to be the one who said no to Denise first. I didn't make it easy for her, and I didn't make it hard either. I told her we could start small. Grant, for his part, started showing up to vendor walkthroughs on his own initiative, asking questions instead of agreeing with whoever had spoken last, which was either growth or fear, and I decided it didn't matter yet which. The fourth wave was the slowest, and in some ways the heaviest, and it was Denise's own. The county's review of the vendor kickback pattern moved the way these things move, methodically, without a deadline that satisfies anyone watching for one, and I want to be honest, that nobody arrived at Hollow Creek Barn in handcuffs that spring. What arrived instead was steadier, a restitution order requiring repayment of the $96,000 documented in Walt's ledger, a formal note in the county's business fraud file with her name on it, and a version of Denise that stopped attending the open houses she used to run like a coronation. First, the big spring one, then, eventually, the smaller ones too, until Priya mentioned, almost in passing, that Denise had said she didn't feel it was her place to run the walkthroughs anymore. It wasn't an apology, it was the first honest sentence about herself she'd said in longer than anyone could remember, and coming from Denise, that was its own quiet kind of consequence, the loss of the role costing her more than the money ever could. 8 months later, Walt asked to meet me alone, at the barn, on a Tuesday morning before any vendors arrived. He'd started coming in early most days by then, not out of habit exactly, More like a man testing whether a door he'd assumed was locked might actually open if he tried the handle. He set a folder on the table between us, and for one unsteady second, I thought it was another tackle box, another 11 years he'd been sitting on. It wasn't. It was a simple proposal, typed clean, making his advisory role at Hollow Creek formal, and voting, in writing, so that no future season could quietly write him back out of it, the way the last 11 years had. "I should have done this a decade ago," he said. "I kept waiting to be sure. I'm done waiting. I signed as a witness." It felt like the opposite of the amendment that had started all of this. A document that gave someone their name back instead of taking it. Denise never apologized to me, not directly, not in any of the months that followed, and I want to be honest about that, rather than hand this story a neater ending than it earned. What she did instead was smaller and, in its own way, more true. She stopped narrating the family the way she used to, stopped introducing herself at events as the woman who built Hollow Creek Barn from nothing, started saying, when anyone asked, that it was a family business, plainly, without her name doing all the work of the sentence. I don't know if that's an apology. I've stopped needing it to be one. Priya reads to Asher some Sundays now, badly, doing all the voices wrong, and it's become one of his favorite things. Grant runs half the vendor walkthroughs himself, competently, the way a person does when they finally stop waiting for permission to be good at something. Callum built a small sign for the reception hall the spring after the investigation closed. Plain wood, no plastic wrap, no laser level, just Hollow Creek Barn, established, with his grandfather's initials, and under it, smaller, the initials of everyone who actually runs it now. Walt's among them, first. I didn't become hard. I became someone who reads everything before she signs it, which I already was, and someone who finally understood that being the paperwork person was never a small role in this family. It was the only role that was ever going to save it. Quiet is not the same as absent. Walt taught me that in a garage with a bent latch tackle box, the same year I taught it back to him, without meaning to, at a reception desk, over someone else's forged version of my own name. So if you're the one in your family who reads the fine print, who gets called the anxious one, the difficult one, the paperwork person, for insisting that agreements between people who love each other still deserve to be written down clearly, I want you to hear this. Being careful is not the same as being difficult. Loving your family does not require you to stop reading what they put in front of you. And if someone in your life has gone quiet lately, the kind of quiet that gets mistaken for gone, it might not mean what everyone around you has decided it means. It might mean they're still watching, still counting, still waiting to be sure. If you've ever been the one holding the real proof while everyone else held the louder version of events, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you were keeping and how long you kept it before someone finally asked to see it. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real families, title examiners, or tackle box ledgers is coincidental. If one thing from it stays with you, let it be this. The quietest person in the room is sometimes the only one who has been paying attention the whole time.